Music is passion.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Wonder of Anime podcast. I'm your host, Lisa. I am a multimedia anime content creator, and my work spans across my blog, my YouTube channel, and of course, this podcast. Here on this show, I interview your favorite voice actors and other important figures from the anime industry, as well as anime content creators. Welcome back to another week of the show. I am so excited to be bringing you another amazing episode. And yes, I am biased. I do think all my episodes are amazing. But really, the caliber of guests that I have on here just gets better and better. This week, we will be jumping right into the interview portion of the show. As far as what I am watching in anime and reading manga, nothing has changed from last week to this week. So we can skip all that until I have other things to talk about and get right into this week's episode. I'm so excited to be bringing you this conversation because when I'm telling you guys that I geeked out, you're going to listen to this episode and hear how excited I was to be getting all this knowledge and all this information. This week, I have Brandon Bovia on the show. Brandon Bovia is an animator and a freelance manga letterer touch-up artist. If his name sounds familiar, in last week's episode with David, he brought up Brandon because Brandon also works in Kaiju No.8 as a letterer, and David does the translations. Brandon also works on Dragon Ball Super and a bunch of other projects as well, which we get into in this episode. I have so much manga, and the things that we talk about, the things that his job entails, were things that I never thought of. I was like, you are really blowing my mind at the fact that someone like you, the role that you do, makes it so that I have my collection, makes it so that I'm able to read and understand, and also just have a product that is visually appealing and I can enjoy it in my own language. Like, it's just so awesome, and I can't say it enough. I'm really geeking out in this episode. Brandon was such a joy to talk to, so informative, and there's people that you talk to that just vibe on a level, and you guys know me, I normally vibe with all my guests, but like Brandon, he just took all my questions like a champ and didn't make me feel any type of way. As many questions as I had. So a big thank you for Brandon for joining me on this episode. Of course, a big thank you to Rob, who had sent me Brandon's profile, and David from last week's episode, because he also mentioned me to Brandon and that I would be reaching out. So this episode is such a labor of love and just goes to show how awesome it is to be in community with others. Thank you guys, as always, for listening to this episode. If you have any suggestions on people that you want to hear on the podcast, different roles, whether it's an anime or manga that you want me to reach out to, any industry professionals that you think would talk to me, let me know, because I'm always open to having different guests on. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it, and I hope you have an amazing week. Bye now. I guess to get started, if you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I guess I'm Brandon Bovia. I work on manga for a living. I'm a letterer, which is basically this sort of like I guess you could call it like graphic design. It's a very similar sort of thing like in Western comics. It's like the person who like copy and pastes all the dialogue and chooses fonts and that kind of stuff. And then for manga, there's sort of like an added layer of localization. So where if there's things that are like signs or sound effects in addition to the dialogue, I'm the person who handles all that stuff. And I work on manga that some people might have heard of, like Dragon Ball Super and Kaiju No.8 and stuff, and dozens more.
Well, I didn't know this was like a position that existed.
Right? Yeah, it's weird.
I guess you would think it does, but until like somebody puts a name on it, like I of course read manga have manga at all times near me. And I just think, like, I don't know why it never occurred to me that somebody is going in and fixing or editing the language that is often drawn into the background, like sound
Yeah,
effects
yeah.
and things like that. So I always like to know, what was your like weeb journey like? Like, have you been an anime manga fan all your life? How did you get into it? How did you get to this manga anime
Yeah, I mean,
thing?
so I'm a millennial. I'm in my late 20s. So that I'm a Toonami kid, basically.
Yes.
That's sort of where it all begins. I don't remember which one, was like first anymore because it was so long ago, but so the Dragon Ball Z and Pokemon and Sailor Moon, all that sort of stuff pretty much was where I started. I guess in a more interesting fashion, I became more aware of anime as anime around the time I was like maybe 12 or 13 or so, which I feel like is about the ripe age for most people. And that's when I started really getting into stuff like Naruto and just Shonen Jump in general, and just like basically seeking out whatever I could find.
That is also a millennial here, also a
Yeah.
Toonami kid, watching Pokemon, Digimon, not really knowing it was anime. And like you said, like finding out, I think I was like 10 or 11 when I discovered Inuyasha and then
Oh, yep,
learned
yep,
like, oh, this is anime. Like this is a certain type of cartoon that I've been watching. But
yeah.
it's so interesting because I feel like a lot of us that are millennials, like we've gone through this phase where once we know like the name of it, then we're just like watching a whole bunch of stuff, even if it's not even like our genres now, but
Oh, yeah,
we're like,
yeah, yeah.
you just
You just
wanted to
get your hands on
consume.
all of it.
Mhm. Like I remember I was watching like Fooly Cooley. I was like, I would
Yep.
never watch that now. But when I was younger, I ate that shit.
Yeah, yeah,
I was
absolutely.
it's so I love that like a lot of us have the similar journeys in that aspect. So you also, I assume that you also do translation because you're fixing the backgrounds that have the
So
Japanese.
that stuff is normally done by the translator. Like I just
Mhm.
get like a Word document, and it's just, basically it's got everything on the page that needs to be done. We don't need to know Japanese for our job. I'm fairly intermediate at it, but it's just sort of like, and it helps when sometimes things are unclear or the placement is unclear, and I can just read it and know where stuff goes. But yeah, for the most part, we're not translating things. We
Mhm.
are just putting in the words that the translators have put in.
So the reason I asked that is because the Japanese that you do know, then was this like, did you start this as a teen or like kind of
Oh,
what
yeah.
was your journey into, I guess, being a letterer?
Oh, yeah. So I think the big thing for me was I drew my own comics. I wanted to be a comic artist originally, and so I was drawing my own like manga styled comics, and particularly in high school. And what I would do is like I would be looking at like the manga that I had just lying around in my collection, and just not only in terms of the art, but also in terms of the lettering. I was looking at like how do they do the sound effects? How does it what does a good version of this look like? And so I was trying to get as close as possible way back in high school, and so that kind of serves even now, I think, to like the foundation of what my work is.
That is so awesome. Do you still draw your own comics and stuff now?
uh Not really. I still draw plenty, but like I haven't drawn like a proper comic in years.
Listen, it'll come
Always
one
on the
day.
back of my mind, like I should do that again. The lettering would be so much better now.
Now that you have these skills,
Yeah, yeah.
because I see obviously there's like this involves like graphic design. So how was kind of like your journey? Because like I said, I didn't even know this was a job. So like how did you
Yeah,
even
yeah.
find out this was a job and get
Yeah,
into
I
it?
mean, I think it sort of goes back to just like uh looking through just manga that I had around. And I would be looking at like the credits pages, and I would start following like, oh, okay, like this person lettered this, and I can go check out other books lettered by that person, and you sort of get a sense of each person's like individual style and stuff. And that, I think, was sort of where I was like, okay, like lettering for manga is like a whole thing. Like there's people, whose jobs it is to, do that. And so even back, gosh, I want to say 2011, 2012 or so was when I was like, you know, it would be really cool if I had that job because I have those skills. And I feel like I even back then I had a fairly like critical eye for that sort of thing, but I didn't actually get my start until 2017.
I love that you like looked at the people in the credits and stuff because I feel like I do that. I feel like sometimes I'm like, let me who's this person on here?
Yeah,
And a lot of times people think like, oh, nobody's like looking at the credits and stuff, but I'm like, it's important to see
it is important. Yeah.
who's producing the work that I wanna that I'm interested in or something. I mean, I ain't gonna translate nothing, but
Yeah, but
but who and it's I think I was saying David like sometimes like you're so used to you start recognizing the names and like
yep.
I'm a huge like Clamp fan. So a lot of
Mhm.
the Tokyo Pop Clamp works that I have like I collect the Clamp stuff. So a lot of it the Tokyo Pop was like translated by like the same person for like a lot
Yep.
of them. And I'm just like I think I remember a couple years ago, like before I started my podcast or anything, I was like look them up online, and I'm like, I wonder what they're doing now. Like, are they still here? Because I think
Yeah.
too is that I guess I didn't realize how everyone has like their own style, and as a person, you put that into the work that you're doing.
Yep.
So with the lettering, I'm so curious. Do you have like a direction, like somebody above letting you know like what exactly is they're looking for, like on a page, or is that kind of like up to your judgment on what you're fixing or what you're adding the
Mhm.
like information to?
I would say so. Most publishers have like a style guide, and that style guide dictates things like what kinds of fonts you can use. You know, do you subtitle the Japanese sound effects or do you replace them outright? Like if you're subtitling them, there's like multiple approaches you can take in terms of like size and font choice and stuff like that. And some publishers are more strict than others. I think if you sort of pay attention, you can see like, oh, you know, for some publishers, I think no matter who the letterer is, like they're this stuff all kind of looks the same or looks similar, just because that's just like they have a house style and that is what you do. But other publishers do give you a good amount of freedom in how you want to approach things. And then individual editors can be an influence as well because they might be looking for something. But so it just sort of it depends on a lot of things.
That I'm just like I'm thinking of some of the specifically because I have like I just reread this and I look at like some of like the background and I'm just like this is such a hard job. Like I think about
Yeah.
especially like fight scenes and things like that because I it wasn't until now that I'm like that I pay more attention to the other because I'm like when I'm into something, I like devour it. I read
Oh
it
yeah.
so fast, like I'm not even noticing. And for my YouTube channel, I have this series again with Clamp where I'm rereading all the work from the beginning. So I'm reading it slowly and more like taking my time looking at stuff on the pages. And I noticed like some of the sound effects are like in the actual like part of the fight that's happening, and I'm just thinking I do
Oh yeah.
light graphic design for my own personal brand and stuff, and I'm just like I cannot imagine replacing some of these things and like the
It can
time
get pretty tough.
consuming.
For I guess for somebody listening who doesn't maybe quite understand why this is so difficult is that when it comes to things like sound effects and signs and stuff like that, we have to just sort of manually go in and you know like erase the Japanese and then put the English in, and then because you know the character placement doesn't match one to one, you have to redraw the art to sort of like fill the gaps. And so if you're doing something with like a fight scene or a bunch of detailed backgrounds, like there's just lines everywhere. And so making it a seamless reading experience so that you don't think about those things is like that is the things that I pride myself on. It's like just making it look like it was originally supposed to be there.
I would imagine too in doing that, especially since you also like, you know, you've done your own art and stuff. Like, do you feel like you get like a perfectionist kind of vibe when you're working
Yeah.
on it? Because I feel
Yeah.
like the minor graphic designs, I'm putting like quotes because I don't want anybody to confuse me for somebody like you who's actually knows what they're doing. I just do light stuff like cloning things when I need to. And I'm just like, it will take me forever because I'm so critical. And I imagine like when you're doing this, like Kaiju No.8, where you're getting this week to week and there's deadlines. Like, how do you, I guess, in your mind, like work on it, or have you trained yourself in a way where I imagine speed comes into it, but like you're not like over analyzing every single thing?
Yeah, I think at this point, like five or so years into it, I kind of have a good understanding of what I'm allowed to get away with or what I let myself get away with. If just because I have so many manga to work on, like I just you learn to let stuff go. And sometimes that does because there is sort of like there's a bit of a back and forth process with editorial. So not so much for like weekly stuff because there's no time, but like for print volumes, there's usually like 2 or 3 rounds of feedback. So that usually gives me a little bit of room to like, okay, maybe if I'm looking at this again while I'm not just, I've had enough distance that I can come back and be like, do I need to tweak this? Do I not? And then there's stuff that the editors point out, like that, they basically tell me tweak this, tweak that, stuff that I've potentially missed or thought would have been good, but I think your decision making in the moment, especially when you're on deadlines, like it isn't always what's like the best approach for just like for the book in general, just like for the reading experience. So I appreciate having those rounds of feedback because I can kind of get out of my head a little bit.
Yeah, like and I think too, like it sometimes I find this even like if I'm writing or like editing a video or something, like the more you look at it, the more you find things like I feel like you start making stuff up that be
Yeah.
wrong. Like you're like, this looks, and it really isn't, but you've been working on it so long, like your own mind is playing tricks on you. And sometimes you got to be like, all right, let me just take a step back and process this mentally.
Oh yeah.
So with the is with the weekly stuff, and then for example, once that gets turned into like a volume that they're gonna go to print, do you have
Mhm.
access to the same like chapters like that you worked on for the weekly, or is there like, do you get a new file and you got to kind of start everything all over again?
It's a little bit of both. So the man, where do I want to start with this? So like the art files that we use for weekly stuff and volume stuff are completely different for a number of factors. Like they tend to be for print, they tend to be come in at a higher resolution, and the manga artists often make changes to the art. They tend to correct stuff between volumes, depending how much depends, but like just in case there are changes, we tend to just like we just use the art that comes from the volumes, and then we can copy and paste the dialogue lettering, and that usually involves some just because of the way that like the files are organized and the way that things are laid out. I usually have to scale the dialogue lettering kind of up or down to match a little bit, just I think probably because of like the resolution differences and stuff like that. And then one thing you don't have to worry about with digitally published manga is stuff like bleed and gutter and stuff like that. So you have to, for print, you have to make sure the text is placed in a way that it won't get cut off. So when going from like the weekly release to the print release, I'm having to, like I'll nudge this in here a little bit and stuff like that.
That again, things that I've never thought of in my life. And I'm just like, this because I too, I'm not gonna, I now am an adult and I have adult money, so I can purchase manga, but I'm not gonna lie and act like I've never looked at a fan
Oh
translation
yeah, of
or
course, of course.
scans. We all have. No, because some
Yeah,
people try to act holier. I wouldn't, come on, we've been there.
yeah,
But I
yeah,
do find it
yeah.
now that you've said that, I just think about, especially like with the manga artists going in, I think about how I've read stuff scans and I will then go and purchase the manga. And I think of
Mhm.
how different or just subtle changes too that you're like, huh, this, because I'm the type of person that if I'm like, wait, I'm like reading this, I'm like, hold on, let me look it up and see what I saw before. And it makes
Right,
sense
yeah.
that some things, it's kind of like what anime, like when they're releasing anime and then when they put it on DVD, like they
Oh
touch
yeah,
it
yeah.
up and stuff like that. Do
It's just
you?
you have more time.
Yes, and then you have, and then, but it, the untrained eye like isn't like looking at things like that.
Yeah,
Do you ever
yeah.
have moments where you're like, I like when you get the book form and you're about to do the book, you're like, great, I can read. This is gonna be better than the, or you have, I guess, like a second. Does it feel like a second chance to make it even
Yeah.
better?
So I think the big thing, like because the weekly releases is like it is just subtitled sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
And I think adapting the sound effects and fully replacing them, or even just like more stylized subtitles, that tends to be where most of the work comes in for the print release. So I would say for the most part, when I'm taking my weekly work and preparing it for print, I would say it is like 90% the same. There is in the case of Kaiju No.8, we actually the weekly releases, we like started I want to say like a month or so behind the Japanese release. So we did like the first 5 chapters, like me and David and our editor Carlo, like we did that in a weekend. Like we pumped those out super fast. So when it came time for like volume 1 of Kaiju No.8 to release, like about a year later, that because the weekly release was on such a truncated schedule, I was able to go back and sort of like, okay, I'm gonna like tweak the fonts here and there a little bit. I just like I think if you compared like on the Shonen Jump app, because it still has the weekly versions, if you compared it to the print release, you would see all of these like little nips and tucks I made here to just sort of like my lettering choices. But I would say like as far as my approach to lettering the dialogue, it is for the most part 90% unchanged.
Like my mind just feels so blown because I'm like, it was here all along. I just never knew or paid attention to it. That is so awesome. And you mentioned you work on things like multiple, you're not just working on one series, you're working on
Oh yeah.
multiple things at a time. What kind of does your schedule look like? Or like how do you pace yourself when you're working on stuff? Do you tend to like, I'm starting this series, I'm gonna finish this one project before doing the other? Are you doing things simultaneously? Like kind of what is the best way you organize yourself?
I would say on a good day, or no, I would say on an average day, I'm juggling like 3 different manga. I wouldn't call that a good day necessarily. But so I tend to sort of split things into like, well, okay, and usually I have deadlines for like maybe closer to 6 or 7, maybe 8 at a time. And so I'm kind of like, which 3 are due the most soon, or do the soonest? And I just sort of focus on that. I think if I can get away with it, I tend to pick 2. But yeah, sometimes I'm like, all right, a full work day is often like juggling 3 or 4 different books, which can be tough, most certainly.
I
And
feel
I'm not the best at scheduling. Sometimes I'll start working at like 7 or 8 in the morning. Sometimes I don't get started until noon or 1, and I'm just like rolling out of the bed. It's definitely a place I think I could get better at. But at the same time, being full-time freelance affords me that freedom to roll out of bed at 1 if I really want to.
I mean, and I don't know, sometimes too, like, do you find like you work better under pressure? Like, I know it's
Yes,
like taboo,
100%.
but I'm like, I don't know if it's my sign placement, but I'm like an Aquarius. And for some reason, like, and I know some people are like teachers would always be like, don't we can tell when you procrastinate. And I'm like, you've never been able to tell because I've always gotten A's. But sometimes I feel like that extra pressure, like you just because you're determined to get it done and you know
Yep.
that you're getting it done like quicker, you're determined to make it really good. You're like,
Yeah.
yes, like this is
Yep. Absolutely. I had a little bit of a lull here in October, and so there was stuff that I really could have been doing and maybe should have gotten ahead on. But if I only have one thing to do for the day, I'm often just kind of like,
whatever.
so yeah. So I feel like I need to have that pressure a little bit to be like, okay, gotta keep my plate spinning, gotta keep it going.
Right.
But yeah, it's that's a bad habit. It is.
Is it though? Because you're getting stuff done. We
Yeah.
need to deconstruct what we think about how people get work. Because I feel like too, like people are always like, you gotta do this and do it a certain way. And it's like, if it works for you, like I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
letting go of that mentality where it's like, I gotta work during the day. And it's like, if you're working at 3 a.m. and it works for you, like why fix it? It's not broken.
That's true. That's true.
Do you have, because you are freelance and you're accepting projects and things like that, is there like a certain limit where you're like, all right, like I'm not gonna accept X amount of projects? Like how do you pace yourself so you don't burn out?
poorly, and I am burnt out.
Oh no.
But the real answer is that I had to learn a lot of hard lessons this year. I had some pretty bad like computer issues back in June or so, and that happened at a moment where I was already like I had zero wiggle room, and suddenly I couldn't work for like a week and a half. And then it was just like I didn't get like my schedule was just backed up until like a couple months ago. It was real bad. So I'm trying to be better at understanding like, hey, just because I can take on everything doesn't mean I should. And I'm allowing myself to sort of like just be realistic with myself. If like I can't handle this, just say you can't handle it. Like that is it is more responsible to just let them know that you can't rather than having the like veneer of like you want to appear reliable so you accept everything, but then you're not reliable because you're constantly missing deadlines, and it's like yeah, that's not healthy.
I just want to thank you for being candid about that, because I am like in this creator space and people don't talk about that, like where
Yeah,
you like get in over your head. And I think it's so important because I feel like you want to do good. You want to like feel like you can do everything, and then you're burning yourself out. And like you just
yep,
said, like you think you're being reliable by being like, yes, 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 I can do it. And then in turn, like you're doing way too much that like something's slacking, like something got to
yep,
give,
yep,
something's going to suffer. And I feel like this is where people like in terms of, I'm speaking like create, because I have a lot of creative people who follow me, like you end up just your hand is in way too many places when in fact you could just scale back, and it's quality over quantity. You
yep,
might be working
yep,
on less, but you have more to give those projects. And I think people, I've had times like that too where I've like, thought that I could schedule 3, 4 interviews back to back to back. And then I'm like, oh no, like after the
yeah,
second, I'm like super. And then, I've had to reschedule. And then people like are like, oh, I just cleared my schedule for you. And
yeah,
now you're, like you have that. And I think it's so important for people to be candid about. And sometimes I feel like it's unfortunate, but until it happens to you, like you don't learn those lessons. Like
yeah.
you kind of have to be burnt a little bit.
Yeah, you have to learn what your ceiling is. Like you have to learn what your limits are, and like you only do that kind of by just butting up against your limit. And it's like okay, and then in my case, a lot of the problems that I would have is like every time I hit that limit, I would learn how to get a little bit faster and a little bit faster. So I was like, at this point now, I can bang out manga volumes like nobody's business because I've hit my limit so many times. But that always thinks that I have it makes me think I have more time than I do. Where it's like I forget that yes, I can do a manga volume in like 4 days, but do you really want to? No, that's not good.
No. Or like you said, you mentioned you had computer problems. Sometimes too, like you get that false sense of confidence and then something happens that's out of your control,
Yep,
or like it's
every
gonna
time,
set you back. Like,
every
yes,
time.
you gotten faster. This the time your computer says, psych, I'm gonna
Yep,
have some issue that now is
yep.
your problem.
Oh,
it's it's hard. And I think, but I love, stuff like that in the times of like that self-development, because that's also, this is for your job, but this is lessons for any part of your life too, where it's like things are
exactly.
so, there's always that point where it's like, when people are like, there's this meme, it's like, oh, everything's going right in my life, so I know my check engine line about to turn on. It's like
Yep.
everything's fine and now your car got like a problem or something. But that's life on a bigger scale. Once you think you've got something mastered, here comes the next level, here comes a new lesson for you to learn that's going to manifest itself in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I love that lesson. In a positive direction, what do you think is like doing this job and all these projects? Like what is something you feel like you've gained positively, or like new skills, or something that you're really proud of that you've managed to accomplish in doing this work?
Um, I honestly think I just kind of like it's let me grow up a bit. Just in terms of like when I started this work, I was like a college dropout. Just living at home, like no prospects or really anything. And so I sort of had to over the years I've kind of become like the learning how to support myself, learning like okay, I got bills to pay and stuff like that, and just sort of like general adulting. I think that this some of the most rewarding stuff, but also like it comes with a sense of just like I'm an artist, so I love getting better at stuff. I love feeling progress and being able to look back and go like, oh, like this a manga that I may have lettered like 5 years ago. It's like, oh, I would take a completely different approach to that now. And even though like it's something that's out in the wild and people have gotten enjoyment from, and that is satisfying in on its own level, I think I sort of get this double satisfaction from like, yeah, I'm better and I'm going to continue getting better at this thing.
And that, this first of all, shout out to the college dropouts. I'm right here with you. Although I'm almost done getting my degree finally, but I think like that part of growing up, it's so funny because I think of sometimes of things in like a boomer mentality. Like a boomer would be like, this isn't a real job, like, and it's funny, like you've taken like such a passion and made it a real job. I mean, it always was a real job, but like the fact that people, often look down on freelance, whatever type of freelance work people are doing, like people don't usually think of that like as a main source of income or as something sustainable. And like you've made it something sustainable and you've been able to continue that. Like to me, like that's so awesome because people often don't look at freelance, or I mean, it also depends on the industry too, because I guess not all like freelance is like lucrative and things like that, but that actually just made me think of because like doing this podcast and all my creative things, I'm very like in tune in the industry, and I know because of the pandemic there was like a boom with manga sales, like manga going through the roof, people, publishers getting requests to publish things that have been out of print. Now they're trying to get more licenses. Has that affected your line of work in terms like there's a lot of projects for you to work on, or like the ability is there?
Probably to a negative degree almost, because I work for like I like 6 or 7 different manga publishers. I'm trying to count off the top of my head, somewhere in the ballpark of 6 or 7, which is way too many. I don't recommend that to anybody ever. Of course, I work for those 6 or 7 in like differing capacities, but because we've had sort of a manga boom here in the pandemic, it's just like even before like 2019, I was already at the point where I'm like, I'm good. I'm not wanting for work since 2019 basically. But since the pandemic, it's just been like everybody wants a piece of me, more or less. But which is where I had to learn to like, all right, I gotta pick my battles.
Right. And the good thing is though, there's work. Like
yes.
And the more work, you can be more selective. And
yes,
now you
absolutely
have options. So because you're working for different companies, and obviously everybody's gonna have their own process. Are you, how do I word this? Like if somebody is reaching out to, are they like, here's the projects, here's 5 manga, we want you to do these 5 mangas, or are they reaching out to you for specific manga titles? Like, I guess in terms like, how do you get the assignments that you get?
I would say most of the time it's one at a time. I've heard of people being able to pick out from a list, and I think I've gotten that once. And but yeah, generally speaking, it's like, hey, we have a specific project for you. A couple of times, they've approached me just like specifically like, we think you would be a good fit for this, just like based off of your taste and your experience, and that's always at least a little bit flattering to me. We're like, oh, okay, they considered that I might be the best person for this, even if I may or may not be. But I appreciate the thought on that level. There was what other thing I was going to add to that I don't. Thought just completely left my brain. I'm sorry.
It is okay.
But yeah, usually one at a time.
Usually, and you mentioned the style. Do you find that like, are you getting approached for the same? Because a lot of shonen is depending on the artist, but there's similar tropes, there's similar things in the art style. Are you getting approached for like all shonen, or is it like varied? Like it can be like a slice of a Josie or a shoujo or things like that.
Yeah, it really depends. I don't know. Like at Viz Media, say for example, like because I work both on Shonen Jump stuff and I also work on just like broader stuff outside of that branding. And so for the broader stuff outside of that branding, like I've worked on like two different Shoujo Beat projects and a couple of like Viz Signature and just kind of other random stuff. But just like for Shonen Jump in particular, it's a lot of like, hey, you worked on this thing and it didn't do too well, so it got canceled. So here's the next thing that's starting next week. It's kind of just like one thing after the next, honestly. So maybe more about availability rather than sort of like personally crafted towards one skill set. I don't know.
With lettering, do you like if you are assigned a project, like is the letterer the same person through the whole, every single chapter? Is it like that?
Most of the time, yeah. Again, they can account for just like availability.
Mhm.
So I worked on like two random chapters of Haikyuu because the main letterer for that was like on vacation or something. And there are a couple other series where I just sort of like I filled in just like, okay, I'm here, just doing it for this week. Um, I don't think I've had anybody do that for my projects just because like I don't go anywhere, so I'm just here doing this stuff full
You better
time.
take vacation. Burnout. This
I'm
is how you
trying.
prevent
I'm
burnout.
trying.
You gotta be like, wait,
Yeah.
the manga's going on hiatus. This is my chance to go on a
Yeah,
vacation.
exactly.
Oh, that's so cool. This is so like fascinating.
Yeah.
Is there like a project that people would be like surprised or like, because I was talking to David, I was telling him I'm like a huge Boys Love fan, and then
Mhm.
he whips out this boy that I've
Oh yeah.
already
Yep.
read and I own, and I'm like, but you wouldn't think so because
You're right.
he
You wouldn't
has a
think.
lot of shonen and stuff.
Yeah. So one you wouldn't think that I worked on.
Hmm.
Um, it's funny. Like a friend of mine who was reading it approached me about this like a couple days ago. It is a manga published under Denpa called Pleasure and Corruption, and it's basically like this kind of like weird kinky BDSM manga.
Oh my god.
And like they just straight up like they're like, you didn't use a pseudonym for this? I was like, I didn't really care.
Not you didn't use
Yeah.
it, like you would be like, sorry, use my different name.
Yeah, I was like, and they even asked me at the time. I think they were like, "You want to use a pseudonym for this one?" I'm like,
Is that
whatever.
common? People using pseudonyms for certain projects?
Yeah, well, I don't know about common, but it is definitely like one of those. If you ask, they accommodate.
Oh,
And I've never had to do it myself, or I've never felt the need personally. But I generally like outside of that one, I feel like I don't tend to work on like really raunchy stuff, so I haven't felt the strong need personally.
I just Googled it and I don't. This cover looks
it's
interesting.
it's something, all right, yeah. And that was one where I didn't know what I was getting into. And then just by the time I started, I was like, oh, all right, sure. And because you want to be seen as reliable, so you're just like, all right, I'll stick it out.
I guess I'll do this.
Yeah.
So when you get projects, do you get like a summary or like a kind of like, here's what this is about?
Um, Sometimes it can kind of I think it could range from like nothing basically to just sort of like, here is a preview link in Japanese on like a book site, like just sort of like, see if it's kind of your thing. And I think a couple of times I've gotten like the full like sort of back of the book summary, but yeah, for the
Is
most
there
part, I don't know. Some people are actually pretty picky about just like the kinds of things that they work on. If I have time, I'll do pretty much anything. And most of the things that I have started to turn down is just it's the time thing. Like,
Mhm.
but there are also things that I would I would maybe not work on if I just like, I guess sometimes my eyes are bigger than my stomach, or just
Mhm.
kind of like, I probably didn't have to take this on, but I have money.
Listen, money, that was gonna be my next question. If there was
Yeah,
anything or like any genres that you just won't touch. Because I mean everybody has their things, but also money is good. Like
yeah, money's good. Yeah.
so if you I'd ask Brandon this too, if you are like working on a series that you like actually are reading and actually enjoy, what is your process when you get those like when you get the translation? Are you like, let me read it first and see what happens in this next chapter, or you like, let me just work on it and then I'll go back and enjoy it?
I tend to for Dragon Ball, I tend to read the chapter before I start working on it just because I'm curious. And something big like Dragon Ball is very entertaining to like, because I know what's going to happen, you know, like a couple weeks ahead of time. So I'm sitting here like, all right, chapter's done, like just ready to watch like the internet implode that, you know, like, oh, Goku did something stupid, or, you know, like, oh, the villain, I can't believe they did this. And I'm just like, I can't wait to see how people will react. I think it tends to be the most entertaining to watch fan reactions for.
Mm-hmm. It feels like you have, I mean, this is nowhere near the same, but I'm like on a press list for Tokyo Pop.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they'll send like advanced like digital copies of stuff that I actually like and like what, and I'm like, then you read it and they don't say nowhere like don't talk about this, but you feel like you're like I'm on a little like I read this before.
Yeah.
Like you feel like you're in on it, and it really does like feel really good. You're like, yes.
Yeah.
So I would imagine, I feel like I would have no chill. Like if they had me working on some project that I really enjoyed, I would just be so hyped. But at least you have like the, you know, David or other people that you work with that you can talk to about the chapter.
That tends to be the best part about being in contact with the translators, for because I'm not in contact with everybody. But in the case of like with working on Kaiju No.8 with David, like David almost without fail every week is just like, hey, like, like, oh, this happened, can you believe it? And I'm like, oh yeah, this is, you know, it's nice to be able to talk to somebody about it like a week or two before it comes out. Because otherwise, for like, I know I've got plenty of friends who read Dragon Ball, and I'm just kind of like just sitting on my hands like I can't talk about it. Like,
are they like, once they read it, are they like, I'm finally caught up, let's talk?
Yeah, for sure. I had a in one of my discords, we have like a fun little group going for a while of just like, you know, we would all read stuff, including Kaiju No.8, and that would be the one where I'm like, I can't say anything. I'm a chapter ahead of you guys, I'm sorry.
That I would listen, I would be, if I had that type of power, I would be so like, yes, you guys are waiting on me so we can talk about it. And I've been here and I've had the knowledge. That's so cool.
Yes.
If you have like a series that you feel like challenged you the most, that was like really took you like to new levels with your skills or anything like that?
I think the big one for me is that, so I worked on a Transformers manga back in like 2018, 2019, and that it was like my first big like action project. And so, and not only that, because it like released in Japan like concurrently with the original cartoon back in like the mid 80s. So I'm working with something where the like the state of like the art files is pretty old, so there was a lot of really sort of specific techniques I needed to come up with just to sort of like get it looking good. And on top of that, it was just like, you know, it's like a silly like, you know, manga for kids, so it's just kind of like the stories are very simple. It's just like wall-to-wall action for like 300 pages. And so that was sort of like where I think I got really good at doing action sound effects. And then it was probably a few months after I finished Transformers, I started working on Dragon Ball, which of course is just, you know, all action all the time. So by the time I started working on Dragon Ball, like I was ready. And I think that, I think that Transformers project was sort of the like, I don't know, people maybe know me for being good at action sound effects, and I think it's probably because of Transformers, where I was like, I have to get really good at this.
You just tapped into another thing that I didn't think about, is like working on older stuff, because I do, you know, a manga release, especially again with this manga boom, like there's a lot of interest for older stuff and like things that or like sometimes in the US we just get stuff late, like they won't license a series into like 2 or 3 years, and art is something that's always changing. So I can imagine like that's not even something that I considered, like the old, because again, me and my clamp stuff, because like like I just think about clamp because they're the work I'm most familiar with, but their art style, like this is all from the 90s. So imagine like the 90s to now their recent, like their 2000s art style, their 2010, like they've changed art style so many times, and that's just one group. So I imagine like the genre and stuff. That's so cool.
It does. The big thing about working on old manga, I'm having to face this challenge with the manga I'm working on right now called Spriggan, which was originally released in Japan in the early 90s. Pretty much any manga published before like 2010 or so, the dialogue is sort of like, you basically have to erase it by hand, because it is just like, that is the status of like where the art files are at, like that's just, and in the case of like Transformers and stuff too, like it's like the dialogue is like physically glued onto the page, so there is no sort of like you just got to erase the Japanese by hand, like completely. Anything about 2010 or newer, you still have to erase the sound effects if that's the treatment that they're doing, but like dialogue at least is on its own separate layer, and sometimes you have to manually turn off that layer, but even that, it's like one click versus like taking multiple minutes to physically erase dialogue by hand.
That is
so that's something that I tend to be wary of. I'm like, if this is little anything over 10 years old, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to erase all the dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Is that like a publishing, I guess, choice now that they are? Because I feel like now, I think as a manga, like a person creating the manga, like you have to expect that, or like at least hope that your work is gonna be translated.
Yeah.
And I guess a lot of companies too, like they already partnered. So I guess maybe that's like the publishers in Japan making those choices to have them on different layers to make it easier to translate.
Yeah, I would say for the most part, and just I imagine like technology has moved on, and then just like like stuff is lettered digitally here in the US. So I imagine like that was sort of the point where they moved on to lettering the dialogue in Japanese digitally as well, I figure.
That's just so, again, things that you don't think about in the way. Well, and there's stuff too, like I am very interested in the industry in general. So if there's like the little editor notes in the back or something like that, and sometimes the mangakas will write their own process where they used to do things by hand, or like
like cutting out screen tone and stuff.
And it's like now that stuff, I mean, it makes it, especially with how quickly manga is being like turned out, and I just imagine the technological advances. But I wonder, and I don't know if this is something that you can answer, maybe just like thinking out loud, where they are like making it, I wonder if they think while they're creating it, like, this is gonna be translated, so let me make this as, like, I don't know, I guess maybe like thinking like, are they making this as easy as possible for it to be translated, like with terms of the dialogue and things like that?
I would say some do consider that, but on the like broad strokes, probably not.
Right.
As much as it would make my life easier, there are some manga artists, because Japanese is read, like vertically and right to left. So that means that dialogue balloons tend to be like taller than they are wide, which can make for a lot of really awkward fits when you're lettering something in English. So there are some manga artists who do opt for like wider balloons, or just sort of like perfect circles or like squares or other shapes. And so those considerations are pretty highly appreciated, because one of the biggest challenges with lettering manga can be like, you can say a lot more with a lot less in Japanese than you can with English. So you can get across like a whole sentence, or a lot of meaning, which is like a tiny little word balloon that's got just like a couple characters in it, and then in English it's just like, it's going to be unreadable. So having to create solutions to make sure that something is still readable within a tiny space, or like you gotta make sure that like, if you have to break up a word because it's in this like just tall word balloon, it's like, okay, maybe don't use words that are just like 20 characters long. And like, just my personal style is that I don't like breaking up words if I can avoid it. just because I think it's easier to read if a word is not broken up, or if a word is broken up, or if like I have to, if a word absolutely has to be, I try to shape the surrounding words to make it look better, to like all the sort of funky technical stuff that I try to keep in mind. But yeah, with thin word balloons, it tends to be a kind of problematic.
This is something that I don't think I've ever paid attention to, but when you
Mhm.
are like putting the words in like the balloons, do you have like, are you able to make like one balloon font like a little bit smaller, or does it have to be, this font size has to be consistent on every single thing?
um I think the like how consistent it has to be depends on, style guide, editor preference. For the most part, I try to make sure that like balloons that are next to each other are as close to the same size as possible. But like if it's like the next panel over, or like across the page, and sometimes you want stuff to be bigger or smaller just like for emphasis.
Mhm.
So I tend to think of it more in terms of like white space, like how close to the edge is like the English lettering from the edge of the word balloon. And so I try to manage that white space per word balloon. So like like proportionally, I guess you could say. I'm trying to keep it consistent proportionally.
That makes sense. I'm thinking too now, I'm just gonna flip through my manga here because I also thought of this one thing that they do where it's like, and I feel like this is very common in shoujo where somebody's like looking up at the trees and they have
Yeah.
thoughts, but then the words like the words are part of the tree, and it's like I forget, they use like translucent um font. Do you find that stuff like that is like, I just think of like here, like where they put the words, this is not gonna, I'm gonna have to cut this out, the actual listening podcast, but where like they have the words as like big things here. do
Mhm.
do you try to match like perfectly what the manga had, or is you kind of have a little bit of freedom there where it makes more sense to make it look a little bit different?
Yeah, so like with I guess with like sound effects and stuff, we are trying to get as close as possible. And so that comes down to like, taking note of like, okay, is the sound effect, is it black with a white outline, or is it white with a black outline? And like we try to emulate like brush effects and stuff like that to get uh that's an aspect I think we tend to have a lot of freedom in terms of like how we want to approach it, but we are generally trying to get as close as possible. Um, and I think if you did kind of like look side by side, you would be able to notice maybe each letterer's sort of like individual approaches. Like my style, I tend to prefer something that looks a little more hand drawn, because sound effects are hand drawn in manga most of the time in Japanese, but American comics tradition is more about using like fonts and manipulating fonts to get like an interesting look. So a lot of, not about a lot, but like some folks opt to just use fonts, and like because you're just using like an outline in Photoshop, the like the width of the outline is the same around the whole font, and that isn't how it is in Japanese most of the time, because they are hand drawn. So there's a little bit there's like some variation. So I try to incorporate some of that variation back into my English sound effects whenever possible. Not all the time. And some folks just go straight up hand drawn English sound effects, which are, I would say that is the ideal, but I don't have the time for it, and I'm not that good at it.
That leads me to this other question that I thought of.
Mhm.
What tools do you use? Are you doing this all not necessarily the program, but are you still like, are you doing this like, do you have like a tablet that you
Oh
draw
yeah,
with?
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When I say hand drawn, I mean like with a tablet.
Mm-hmm. And then, or are you doing it like with like your mouse? And because I never like could do, I have really bad handwriting, so I could and I
Yeah.
can't draw, so I can never do like those tablet things. But I guess, are you using a combination of that, or is it mostly you like with your mouse? on the.
I would say if I'm working on sound effects or if I'm redrawing the art, I'm using a tablet. If I'm lettering dialogue, I'm using my mouse.
Okay. Oh, that's so
Yeah,
cool.
that just and we letter the dialogue in design almost exclusively across the industry, and then any sort of like sound effects, any sort of like image editing. I use Photoshop and Clip Studio Paint like off on the side. And then some people, I would say most people use Photoshop. Some people use Adobe Illustrator, which I think is weird. And I've heard of folks. Clip Studio is a popular choice of just broadly, but I don't think I could like my process is so specific to me. I don't think I could give up using Photoshop as much as Adobe makes me tear my hair out.
Yeah, like once you get used to like a program, it is
Yeah.
very like I've been using Photoshop again for my menial photos. I don't want anybody to think I'm out here graphic designing. Although I did go to school for graphic design for a little bit. But it's like you even when they upgrade it, a lot of the functions are just the same. And it's like
Yeah.
I just can't like I know there's like free alternatives, but I'm like, I know the shortcuts, I know the little like
Yep.
the little Photoshop tricks and tips. Like I can't give that up.
Yeah.
Even though I don't
At this
like
point,
the subscription model.
it would really take more time than I have to sort of dedicate myself to learning something completely new. So it's just like there if there's something specific I need that Clip Studio is better at, I'll just use that. But yeah, I would say I'm using Photoshop most of the time.
That's cool.
And we will never rid ourselves of InDesign because literally everybody uses it for lettering, for just like putting together like the print layouts and lettering the dialogue and stuff like that. Like you just can't get around it.
I I had to learn in design when I went to graphic design school for a little bit. And I was like, what the hell is it? Like it's
Yeah.
so I mean, I guess obviously with practice anybody can
Yeah. I mean,
feel
the
it.
irony is that we had like an InDesign section of one of my design classes back in college, and like I got like a C- on that project back in the day. So I always find it very funny that that's just like my job now was InDesign. Like, of all places to end up.
Right. Like now this is like when people would be like, don't use calculators because you're not gonna have a or like you're not gonna have
Yeah.
a calculator in your pocket. And it's like, well, look at
Well,
me now.
yeah.
Oh, well, this has been so much fun. I'm first of all, thank you for answering all. I'm the type of person I don't really like have like notes or anything like that because I
Yeah.
tend to go based off the conversation. And you just allowed me to ask so many niche questions that I just again like you say things and it makes me realize this is something that I never thought of. And like
Yeah.
I should not like, oh, I need to you don't need to know any in and out of the industries that you're interested in. But the amount of manga that I own, I should
Right.
probably as now that I like I said, I'm paying more attention to those types of things and realizing because a lot of people are like a lot of anime fans or like creative people are like, I want to work in the anime manga industry, and they think like you can only just be a voice actor or you have to
Yeah.
go to Japan and become an animator. And there's like a lot of smaller roles or like niche roles that you wouldn't possibly think of, which is why I kind of want to started this series where I am focusing more on the people behind the scenes, because there might be somebody who is really good at Photoshop, doesn't even know or kind of didn't even think that this would be something that they're able, to do aside from a hobby. Like this is actually your income, and you freelance and work on a bunch of projects. So I really appreciate you taking the time to answer these questions that I'm so like I'm so asking more. I'm like, to say more about this really niche thing.
I love talking about this stuff. So I thank you for giving me a platform to be able to just like, all right, here's all the weird niche like graphic design nerd stuff that I'm doing on all this manga. And I think the beauty of it is that like you can enjoy manga just in your native language. Like you can just enjoy manga in English without having to think about like, I work really hard to make sure that English reading experience is as seamless as possible. So, but like I also do talk about a lot of the technical stuff on my own personal like on my Twitter and stuff. So like that information is out there if you want to seek it out. But like first and foremost, I try to make sure that, somebody just picking it up for the first time just like they need to be invested in the story. Like they're not here to think about the lettering or the translation or anything like that. So I think I pride myself on that.
Yeah, and that just speaks to your skills because you you don't notice or things don't stand out to you because you do such a good job and
Hmm.
it is seamless, whereas opposed to like if you did a bad job or like some of those. And shout out to the fan translators and the cleaning people, like the fan translations, they have like credits like who cleaned
Oh yeah,
this
yeah,
up,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like some, they be trying, and but maybe they can contact some of these manga publishers and get paid to do the stuff legally. But you notice when things are not like
Yeah, you
not
even if you
there.
don't have like the vocabulary to articulate if something is off, like I do think most people can tell
Yeah.
um when they are like reading something and like like the like say like the text isn't centered or like the font is kind of distracting or ugly. Like they might not really know it, but like it's these little things that are kind of chipping away at them and taking them out of the story. So I do think that is maybe sort of the major difference between like reading something officially published and reading like a fan translation, because it's just like a wild west out there with fan translators, and like for better or for worse, that's just like there is not a whole ton of quality control. Not to say that there's none, but just like you don't know what you're getting. And I think with sort of officially published manga, there tends to be like there's back and forth, there's rounds, there's like spell checks and proofing and stuff like that. And so I would say we try to maintain like a pretty high quality bar whenever possible.
You see, this is why I'd be talking forever because you just unlocked another thing. Because my favorite series from Clamp and just in general is XXX Holic, and I learned people just call it Holic. But
Hmm.
I was reading it as it was like coming out weekly in high school. And recently, like in the last 2 years, yeah, I think in 2020, I actually finally was able to purchase the whole collection.
Yeah.
Because I'm an adult now. I got adult money. And the one thing that like you just said that like unlocked a memory in my mind was they, especially because scans often come from like when they're releasing weekly in the magazines,
Yeah, they're physically
and
like
they
ripping out the pages and scanning, and it just looks
and
awful.
there was like, especially like, and this, I'm pretty sure other manga people do this, but Clamp, they'll have like the cover page for the chapter, and it's like so much, like just so much text, like a little like this happened in the last chapter, what's
Oh yeah,
gonna
and
happen,
there's all this like ads and stuff. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And I didn't realize, now I'm thinking about when I finally was able to read it with the actual book in my hand, like how clean and
Yep,
crisp.
yep.
And this is thanks to your job and people like you. Like again, it's things that you don't think about. But now that you said that, I'm like, that was something that I picked up on, like how much easier it was to read, because it's like something, it's like, like back in the day when people would do not just anime, like bad dubs of like foreign films, and the lips
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
even match, like things like that just take you out of the experience. And it is, a lot of I don't tend to think of, like when I think of anime and manga fans, I don't give these type of people a lot of the people that are like, well, I like the original source, and
Yeah, yeah.
I watch subs only because it's and it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
but you don't speak Japanese, you're reading the English at the bottom of the
Yep.
screen.
You're reading the translation. I sorry to sorry to
Sorry
break
to
you.
burst your bubble, you're
Yeah,
still
yeah.
not consuming. I'm consuming it in the way that it's intended. No, it was not
Yeah.
intended to have English text at the bottoms. Get over it
Yeah.
yourself. But I don't really pay attention to them when I talk about anime and manga as a whole, because the fandom overall is not made up of those weirdos.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure.
But it is, I'm somebody that's always about access, and I think it's so important, when we open up and we're translating these things, like you are giving access to a lot of people that may not have had the means. They want to enjoy
Yeah.
something not in their language, and they also want it to look good and have that quality
Hmm.
as if it was intended to be in their language.
Yeah, yeah. I think getting as close as you can is, and this it's sort of like a bit of a philosophical debate maybe, but there is sort of a like every localization work is this balance between like accuracy and sort of reflecting the original experience as much as possible, but also like being an actually good experience in your native language. And like that takes many different forms, and people will debate it until the cows come home on Twitter. But it is just that it is a sort of a philosophical difference between how much you want to balance on one side versus another, and whether or not like being necessarily faithful to the original language down to the sentence is maybe now you're now unfaithful to what the original experience, like if you were a native Japanese reader, like what are the feelings that would give you. And so we're always trying to balance those two things, and I think people do tend to get caught up on like one versus the other, but like it is a balance, and it will always be a balance. And translation and localization will it's an art. It will always be an art. Like it is more art than science for sure.
Yes, and again, this is another reason why I wanted to speak to individuals like yourself and people who are doing this work, because for us fans who love and collect manga, like all this stuff matters and it is very important. And I feel like obviously yes, the original art, but you guys deserve that credit and more of a spotlight. And I just love, like I said, I just love learning. And I know I have a lot of listeners who are also on the same wavelength and love this like technical industry talk. So again, I just want to thank you so much. I do and I always sure to include people's links in the description of my episode, because I am following you on Twitter. But I seen that you have like you've posted like videos of you doing some work and things like that. You had mentioned earlier where you do get into the technical stuff. So I will be sure to link that, because you do have a lot of like resources and knowledge on that you share. Is there anywhere else or anything else that you want to promote that people should check out?
Not really. I mean, most of the stuff you can find on my Twitter. I'm running a little me and a friend of mine are rereading One Piece, and we're putting that into sort of a podcast discussion forum. And you can find that it's called One Piece at a Time. You can find it on YouTube and stuff.
That's if you just want to hear name. Oh my god, I love it. That's clever. That's cute.
Yeah, because the whole thing is because it's such a long manga, and we break it down into only reading 5 chapters every week. So we are quite literally just taking it one piece at a time. And it is a sort of like, here's this whole like this daunting project of reading a manga that's over 1,000 chapters long, but like we've been at it for almost a year, and we're like a quarter of the way through. Like it's not so bad.
Oh my, that is this is not have nothing to do with manga, but like I am my husband's watching One Piece, and I'm like, I'm not watching it, but it be on in the background, and I'm like, like there was this part yesterday. I'm like, should I watch? Because I'm very
that's
like
how they get you.
Listen, I'm very on it. Okay, I just found the podcast because I'll be sure to link that in the description of this episode. But like I said, I'm just like, this is like, my husband's like, are you watching? I'm like, no, because I'm usually like editing or something.
And
it's in English. I do watch a lot of subs, just because for me, not like I'm like sub versus dub, but I'm really bad with not paying attention when I'm watching stuff. And I feel like I'm trying to, when I watch a sub, I'm able to like not look away. And like, if I look away, I miss everything.
Yes, your focus a little bit better.
Right. So, but the One Piece dub is really, really good. And I'm just
it's
like,
awesome.
I've talked about it for a couple years now, like, but I usually like, man, it takes so much work for me to watch a 24 episode anime, because I'm like a 12 girl. Like, give me 12, I'm in and out. And like, and it's weird because I could read a manga that has like 300 chapters. Like XXX Holic has like 2 something, and I read that every year. So, but I will be sure to link this, because you guys have a lot of different content on this channel too.
Oh, well, it's mostly his. Like because he's a gaming YouTuber mostly, and I show up to, like, we do the podcast together, so I'm like the permanent guest basically.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll be sure to link the playlist. You guys have, oh, not me accidentally starting this. Yeah, you guys are episode on chapters 200. But there's like I'm like, this is impressive. And I'm like, oh my God, there's still 800 chapters to go.
Like I said, we're about a quarter of the way through the manga.
Oh my God.
But like, hey, it's been less than a year. So I think that's like, and we're going at it like no normal person would read 5 chapters a week. Like
no,
that is a minimal amount of chapters. So if we can read it in about 4 years, I think anybody can try it. You know, you just got to take a little bit, you know, you got to take it one piece at a time.
I just think, yeah, like, oh yeah, in 4 years, and then like there'll be 1,000 more chapters.
Yeah.
You just never catch up because
maybe closer to 5 or 6 by the time we're done.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'll be sure to link all your socials and your website and this podcast in the description of this episode. This was so much fun. I appreciate you answering all my little nerdy questions and side tangents because one answer leads to 10 more questions.
Yeah.
And that
thank you for letting me ramble. This is all I do every day. So it's just always on my mind.
Rambles.